So recently, we just premiered our 200th episode celebration for Two Black Nerds. Thank you to everybody who tuned in and already
Yes,
have
yes.
shown so much love and support for our 200th episode and also our 4-year anniversary. And as a part of those episodes that we released, we talked about the state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And there were a lot of opinions, there was a ton of conversation, and I think that a lot of it was around the challenges that Marvel has faced. But one of the questions that we made sure to ask all of the special guests that came on was, what project were they most looking forward to that was going to be coming out from the MCU? We wanted to at least end off on a positive note. And I
Right.
think the vast majority of people said Loki. That was in most people's answers, that they were
Yeah.
super excited to see season 2 of Loki finally premiere. So, what I kind of want to start off with before we dive into the episode and give our review is, in your opinion, Des, like, what do you think makes the Loki series special to the MCU? Why has it been one of those projects that have come out over the past few years that for the most part people have enjoyed, even though the franchise as a whole has undergone some other challenges?
Yeah, so many reasons. First and foremost, I think people just love Tom Hiddleston. Like, I think people really enjoy him as an actor. And his portrayals, even more specifically of Loki throughout the MCU that we've seen. I think people really liked him in the Avengers. I think people really liked him. Unfortunately, the movie's not that great, but in Thor too, you know what I mean? I think he helped even make that movie what it was. And so I think people have enjoyed, again, Tom Hiddleston and Loki throughout the time that we've got to spend with him as an actor. And then you move on to the actual TV show of Loki, which is so different than a lot of almost anything we've gotten out of the MCU, particularly in that in the first three phases, right? This is Loki is very different than really anything in the Infinity Saga. And it feels in a lot of ways removed from it, though we know it's attached, though are things in it, though they show us Loki going or the Loki that's in this show kind of still in the Tesseract and going where he in all of those things. It still feels very detached from the rest of the MCU, the way in which where the story takes place. The TVA is in like the middle of nowhere, man. And I think that creates some intrigue for people too. I think people have always been interested in TV shows like The Twilight Zone, right? Or like, very sci-fi shows. And this is one of the ones where we not only get Tom Hiddleston as Loki, but we get kind of that sci-fi kind of feel with it. And people also, to be honest, love time things. It's just, it is what it is. We've always loved time travel, I think, as a concept, as people. And this TV show also includes a lot of those elements, man. And so there's probably a ton of reasons I think why people like this TV show Loki, man. But it is also one of the TV shows that was able to, I think, just keep everyone's attention and feel true to the character that we were getting in Loki. We actually seen growth in season one. Season one felt good. A lot of people like the way season one of Loki was shot. There's just a lot of other things about the Loki as a TV show that a lot of those MCU shows just didn't get us. And so when you ask people what is an MCU project you're excited, to watch that's coming up, Loki's like feels like an obvious choice in a lot of ways, because it's also now probably, even though it's one season, one of the most comfortable, if that makes sense. It's different but still comfortable because it's good. And I think that's what a lot of people choose Loki as one of those shows.
You certainly cannot underestimate the impact that the character had leading up to the show. As you mentioned, just all of those appearances from Avengers to Thor the Dark World, all the Thor movies really,
Mhm.
through the apparent ending of that character in Infinity War. And you just saw so much of a roller coaster of emotions between where he started versus where he ended, presumably. And I remember thinking coming into Loki, although I was looking forward to it, one of the things that I was slightly concerned about was, well, what else can they really do with him? Like, what other
Mhm.
character arc can you introduce for this guy who's already practically been through everything? We've seen so much out of him. He was a villain, he was a scorned brother, he found out he was adopted. He goes through
Yeah.
this really intense sort of relationship with his family, but he loves his mother, and then all of a sudden he's going through the back and forth of betraying Thor till they finally start to mend that fence and patch up their relationship. And as soon as he dies in Infinity War, it's like, damn, well, it felt like they were actually going to go on a good path and actually have a really, really fruitful relationship. And then he gets taken away from us. So it
Mhm.
felt like a really completed arc. And then you come to the Loki series, and the way that they just deconstructed him entirely from what we knew of him to essentially establishing an entirely new interpretation and iteration of the character. is just a really, really impressive feat that they can continue to take him on new rides and new paths and introduce new things to him to really introduce, I think, certain elements of conflict that we haven't previously seen out of him, because now with Loki season
Yeah.
1, we're starting to get into his, I think, his relationships really with other people outside of his family, right?
Hmm.
How does he deal with somebody who is actually like seeing through all the bullshit in a Mobius and can cut right through and say like, I feel like there's more to you than you present. And then ultimately becoming vulnerable to Mobius and establishing a friendship, to even a
Hmm.
character like a Sylvie who starts to develop these more romantic feelings for him. And we start to see like what that looks like. And we never really got that out of the Loki character. And we start to see like, oh, there is like a really tender side to him. And he can start to
Yeah.
like establish this somewhat platonic friendship, but also a romantic relationship at the same time. We don't really know where it's going. They're
Whatever's
still
going
trying
on.
to figure that out right now, but it's super
Yeah.
interesting. And I think all of those things, that human connection to him and the way that they can continue to just like open up all these layers and really tap into who he is, and also just redefine who he is over and over and over again for the better part of 10 years. That's what continues to draw us to him. That's what keeps us coming back saying like, wow, I just didn't anticipate that from
Hmm.
him. And now becoming more of a heroic figure than he ever has before, and potentially being one of like the forefront leader type of characters that we might get out of the MCU. I think it's just like a really fascinating thing, just based on purely where he started from back in 2011. Now,
Yeah.
we've also gotten officially 9 Marvel Studios television shows ever since they launched this new initiative
Sheesh.
on Disney Plus. They've also released a couple of specials, but 9 television series in less than 3 years, really. But Loki is now the first one to officially have a season 2 greenlit, go into
Mhm.
production, and now finally release, of course. Why is that the case? Why is Loki the one and only show amongst all of these other properties that we've seen, the only one that they have felt, I guess, confident enough to say, like, we automatically know that there's more story to tell? So much so that they teased this out really at the end of season 1 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think to be honest, it all comes down to the storytelling that they're trying to do with Loki. I think even again by the end of the first season, running into He Who Remains, they knew and understood that this had the potential to be a show that would be the through line through this phase of the MCU, and that would tie, hopefully, tie some of these things together, some of these loose ends together, and make this phase, to be honest, make sense, or these next couple of phases make sense. In it again, it's such a far world kind of show, but it does feel like the thing that's potentially going to bring us home with having Kang the Conqueror, with having to talk about time travel. A lot of people, again, the idea of Secret Wars is a hard thing to just be like, okay, this thing is happening. You gotta guide people there. And I think when they made Loki, I think they knew that they had the opportunity to use Loki as that vehicle to get people there, to get people to say, okay, I think I understand what's happening in the MCU. I can present a new villain and I can present these new time things in this way to get people to buy in. And so that's one of the reasons, man, that I think that they knew Loki was potentially going to be the one, because after you said 9 shows, to be honest, it still feels the most important. No matter what other shows have going on, Loki feels the most important. And I think overall, that is the most important thing, is that it feels like it's the most important.
Yeah, to that point, I believe recently Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who were directing a lot of the episodes this season, talked about the fact, and they also worked on season 1 as well, but they talked about the
Mhm.
fact that from the very get go, they mapped this out to be a multi-season type of story, which I just find so interesting that that's not been as clear or indicative with some of the other series. Like we don't really
Mhm.
know, and maybe the creators have mapped that out, but they've just yet to get the green light, or probably what Marvel Studios traditionally does. They operate in a lot of secrecy and they just won't tell us until it's time, or they feel like it's time, but they're probably already
Right.
working on the stuff anyway. But just to have that stamp of approval so early on, so much so that at the end of season 1, in those mid credits, we get the immediate confirmation that season 2 is coming. I mean, that was a great source of satisfaction for me personally, just to be very pleasantly surprised at that, knowing that that was just not the trend. That was not something that they were typically doing, and to also anticipate and to have that anticipation build because Loki season 1 was so good and it was like one of the
Mhm.
more exceptional projects. I think that that's just like a great way to also build that excitement. I would love for it to be that way with the majority of these if they're not designed to be limited series, but to your point about just the larger tapestry of storytelling, it does feel like Loki has a very significant and crucial part to what they're doing with the Multiverse Saga. Even if the other projects aren't necessarily pointing to Loki, which they should be, I would want a little bit more of that. I would want some of the more direct connections to be obvious.
Yeah.
But if they're still sort of operating in that siloed sort of mentality until it's time to bring things together and sort of do some reverse engineering, which they've traditionally been pretty good at, then Loki is already just setting up so much good stuff. And now with Kang and Jonathan Majors so far in that role being sort of that prominent or preeminent villain for the Multiverse Saga, I mean, this is the most we've seen him has really been in this show, Quantumania, of course, and now I assume there's going to be a ton of him in season 2.
Mhm.
Last question I want to ask you before we get into the review. It was also revealed that this season of Loki made pretty much an historic achievement. One thing that's just not traditional or typical of Marvel Studios projects. We know that many of their projects typically have either one or multiple rounds of reshoots. They build it into their process. It's just a natural part of production. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily indicative of anything to be concerned about. These movies are just so massive that they often discover so much while filming and they have to go back and do pickups. It's really more of pickups than reshoots, I would say,
Mhm.
and actors typically are already contracted for that time in advance, and so they know like, oh yeah, in 5 months I'm gonna have to come back and film more stuff for WandaVision or whatever project, right? But
Right.
this was the first project apparently that had no additional rounds of pickups or reshoots, like none at all.
Mhm.
So it seems that everything that they set out to film, they pretty much achieved on that first go around. What does that say to you? As just like a person who knows the history of reshoots and pickups across a lot of these projects,
Right.
sometimes some of the challenges that might come with that, you know, in terms of what we see on the screen. What does it say to you that they pretty much, I guess, knocked it out of the park the first time around, and they didn't need that additional time to go back and film any additional material?
I think you spoke to it a second ago, where the showrunners and the writers had already planned for this to be a multi-season television show, man. I think when the planning is just so far ahead and you know exactly what you want to do, probably absolutely years ahead of time, sometimes you can get in there and just knock it out, man. I think that's really what it is. A lot of the films that we see being created today are not necessarily on a whim, right? But they just have shorter time windows and to figure out things that they want to do and things that they need to get done in terms of all of these things, in terms of research and reshoots, in terms of what they want it to look like. I just have a feeling they went into shooting Loki and was like, we know we got it. We already have a season under our belt. We know what the story is going to look like. I know exactly what I want this shot to look like. This over. I think they just understood and they just got it, man. And sometimes you just hit the ground running. And I think they got lucky in that sense, right? Of course, even with planning, that doesn't always happen, right? Like it doesn't always, you still got to do reshoots. But I just have a feeling this is one of those lucky moments where preparation prevailed for them. It came around and they were like, man, I think we actually did it. I think we don't need any of these reshoots, man. And to be honest, that makes you feel good as somebody who's watching it, right? Somebody who's ingesting the content. Like, no, they got it all in one. Because sometimes, like you said, reshoots, although it should, it's nothing, no cause for alarm, right? You shouldn't be like, oh, it's a reshoot happening. Sometimes you hear about it though, you're like, huh, I wonder what they're reshooting. But now it's like, huh, I guess we don't have to worry about that. In a lot of ways, that feels good though too. It's also like a moment, a sigh of relief that I think the creators set out what they wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think that there's certainly a track record that proves that certain reshoots that have happened on these projects and either even other like big budget franchise projects, like sometimes they're really good reshoots. Sometimes like the additional
Mhm.
pickups help
Yeah.
enhance the film, and I think that that's ultimately the goal that they set out to do every single time they have pickups is to add stuff that's going to enhance whatever they've already shot. But sometimes it does happen occasionally. We can be watching something and it's glaringly obvious what's been reshot or what's been picked up after the facts. Like sometimes it's pretty clear, and I've had moments where that's taken me out of a project where it's like, man, I know y'all didn't initially plan for that, and I don't even
Mhm.
know if this is like a good addition to whatever it is y'all shot. And we also hear a lot of stuff too, although these aren't necessarily things to be concerned about. You hear about months and months and months of additional photography for a show like Secret Invasion, which by
Yeah.
the way, we know that's not a great show. It's like, okay, did the reshoots have something to do with that? And we just saw a
Mhm.
movie this past weekend, The Exorcist Believer. I know for a fact that there were reshoots on that movie, and it feels pretty clear that you're watching sort of two different film experiences. The first half feels like one thing, The second half feels like something entirely different that wasn't initially conceived from the get-go.
Mhm.
And I can't fault creators and filmmakers for trying to enhance something to make it better, but it does give you a signal of confidence from this team in particular behind Loki that they really just knew what they wanted to achieve. They already
Yeah.
had it in their mind, and they had the vision laid out, and what they filmed is what they filmed, and that's what they wanted, and they got it. And so we're going to be able to ingest that and hopefully feel confident that it's going to be something that's really worthwhile and really, really satisfactory. But with all of that out the way, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and officially dive into our review of the premiere episode of Loki Season 2. Now, this series is created by Michael Waldron. This first episode is directed by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, and the series is starring Tom Hiddleston, Sophia DiMartino, Gugu Mbatha-Raw, Wunmi Musaku, Eugene Cordero, Tara Strong, Jonathan Majors, Rafael Casal, Katie Dickey, Liz Carr, Neil Elise, Kihi Kwan, and Owen Wilson. And episode 1 is entitled Ouroboros. And so before we dive into spoilers and break down many of the key moments and events that happen in this episode, we like to typically start off with just our general big picture impressions of how we felt without diving into all the specifics. And so, with all of that out the way, man, I'll just go ahead and pass it over to you. What did you think about the season 2 premiere of Loki?
I think this is a pretty good start to a season. I do. I love the way episode 1 of season 2 seeks to wrap up a lot of the pandemonium in which the last season ended. I really like that aspect of the episode while also presenting new problems, adding potentially new, I don't even know if you can call them villains yet, but new something, new new roadblocks, new ideas, and to be honest, this episode is way more dramatic, I think, than I expected it to be. Right, usually episode 1 of any TV show next season is like a, sure, it's a catch up, but also it's usually a little bit slower. Right, this had elements of it that felt like penultimate. I was like, wait, is this an episode 1 or not? What's going on? I mean, the music is crazy, and to be honest, my favorite thing about this episode is the technical. I think this looks amazing. I think it's shot really well. The camera angles work for the story of what's going on. The camera in general, just the way it looks is just fire. I think it's very well directed, and the camera is moving in ways in which I wish they took more risks like this in other Marvel projects, man. It felt really good. I think the color grading is really good. It feels very unique to what Loki is and what Loki is supposed to be as a TV show and the TVA. So I really like the way it's shot as well, man. But coming in and seeing our characters again, it's refreshing. But also they move the plot, and I think that's what I appreciate the most, to be honest. Because again, a lot of times you're like, okay, what happened in this episode? But I can tell you a decent amount of stuff that went down in this first episode that feels like it's going to be important later down the line, at least, right? At least they give us a glimpse of things that can happen. So I like that they set up a lot. I like that it is kind of high drama, and decent amount of energy, and I like all the callbacks, and I like the way it's shot, man. So to be honest, as a first episode of a season, I was pretty satisfied with what I got, man, and I think it was pretty entertaining overall.
Man, we are so back. We are here, and I am so excited that Loki has returned. And this first episode, 1000% delivered for me. To what you just said earlier about the feeling of the episode, this absolutely could have been a season 1 finale. Just the way it's
Mm-hmm.
constructed, the way it's set up, and even the way it's ended, it really could operate as a season 1 finale. And that's why it feels so seamless, that ending of the first season coming into this one. I'll just say, without getting into the specifics it picks up directly where season 1 leaves us off, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you're automatically thrown into the situation in the scenario there, and it's an incredibly intense and high emotion, high impact sort of episode, to where you don't really get an opportunity to breathe because you're sort of reflecting upon everything that's already happened and just the chaos that's ensuing across the time variance authority, which is primarily where we're focusing the series, of course. And so all of that just led to this anxiety that I was sort of feeling watching the episode. But it was good anxiety, because you want to just feel the threat, you want to feel the weight and just the emotional stakes that are attached alongside the story and what Loki is
Mm-hmm.
going through, and of course what Sylvie is primarily going through. And I think that they absolutely knocked it out of the park, while also still just introducing so many new elements that are going to be very pivotal for the season, whether it's new locations, new characters, new look and feel of certain things. All that stuff was just, I think, really expertly introduced in this episode, while
Yep.
making it all still tie in seamlessly to what we saw at the end of season one. And I was just really, really impressed by that. I just thought that that was a great
Yep.
way to establish this season, to set the tone for what it's going to be. It's likely going to be super fast paced, high octane, very little time to really catch your breath and to just digest what's happening. And I think that this series has earned that type of storytelling because we did a lot of setup with season one. We took our time with season one. It was definitely more of a slow paced season, especially once you get into episodes 2 and 3. Things really kind of slow down in season one. But now we know what the threat is. We know exactly what's at stake. And I think that that fast paced, high octane sort of style of storytelling, it's going to really service this in grand fashion. And I'm so
Yeah.
excited. And everything that was just really introduced in this episode has me just completely locked in to what's going to come over the next few weeks. So totally can't wait for that stuff. But folks, with all of that out the way, we're going to get into spoilers. We're going to dive into all the specifics. So if you've not seen the season 2 premiere of Loki, go check that out on Disney Plus and come back and finish out the rest of the conversation. And so let's just start there, man. Let's start at the top of the episode and how it kicks us off. It really is immediately after the events of season one. And we know at the end
Yep.
of season one, Sylvie and Loki, they kind of have a showdown. They do locate he who remains at the Citadel at the end of time, and Sylvie is just hell bent on revenge. She wants to kill him because he who remains has pretty much been responsible for not only ruining her life, but really I think taking over many people's lives as we see.
Mm-hmm.
Sylvie kills him, and that's naturally going to have a ton of repercussions just based off of what he said. But in doing so, her and Loki have this rift between them now. She kicks him back through the time door. He ends up back in the TVA, but it's not his TVA. It's not the TVA that we thought he would have ended up in. It felt like a different TVA. It felt like of a different universe, perhaps, maybe of the past, maybe of the future. It was a little bit unclear. And so, where we kick off things with this premiere episode is Loki still trying to explain to Mobius, who doesn't recognize him, like, what the hell is going on? Like, there's this guy out there called He Who Remains. He's terrifying. He warned us about all these variants that are coming. There's a multiversal war that's impending, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody's really listening to him except Mobius, who's a little bit more understanding. And then, of course, Wumi Musaku's character, Hunter B-15, who also knows that she's a variant that's been essentially taken from her own life and made a employee of the TVA. So all of this chaos and commotion just really kicks us off in high fashion, high fast-paced fashion. What did you think about just sort of this scene setter and how we sort of reintroduced at least ourselves to the TVA and to what Loki and Mobius are going through?
Man, I absolutely loved just picking up where we left off, man, because it's such a crazy cliffhanger when you see it. You're like, whoa, 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 Kang, what is happening here? Can we get some where is Loki? What is happening right now? Because again, I think a lot of us were led to believe that it was the current TVA, right? Like when it's all left said and done, like you said, of course, there's a lot of theories, but we're like, wait, did he go back to his normal time and nobody's remember who he is? And Kang has statues all over the place. I think that's a really good cliffhanger. Then to only bring that in into early season of like, all right, now it's time to start answering questions. And they kind of do a little bit, right? Like you said, he's trying to tell Mobius what's going on, convince him that Kang has wiped his memory several times. But I like that we do figure out that Loki is just time jumping. What is time slipping? I guess is
Mhm.
the more appropriate term, in and out of the past and the present. And I think that makes for a really cool device given just the rest of the episode, man, in what's happening, man. But I really like yeah, I really like everything that's going on. It's now it's like, okay, if he's going on from the past to the to now, that means the past is crazy. Now there's more questions, right? Why does nobody remember? Why is
Mhm.
he what happened to TVA so many times in which he who remains needed to wipe everybody's like there's I love that there is questions that need to be asked in without being asked, if that makes sense. The actions are making the questions arise versus somebody being like, okay, what is this thing that's happening? I really love that because that allows for everything to move as fast as it is given the episode, man. But I love how confused everyone is. I love the how funny it is that how weird it looks when Loki is time slipping. Nobody he's like does it look okay? He lies to him, and Mobius tells him it looks fine, but no, it doesn't look fine. It looks like you're being born and dying at the same time, whatever that means. But I really like all this, man. It really just felt right. Again, given the end, I really like how you can watch the last episode of last season, this episode of the season, be like, dang, is this not the same season of the TV show? It really works, man. It does.
Yeah, that flow in between the season finale of 1 and the season premiere of 2 is just it's magnificent. I think it's a great way to get us back into this world because that question that they left at the end of season 1 is such a massive question. It's such an important question. It's like, well, wait, what happened? And then you find out the time slipping, which I got to admit still feels a little confusing. It's still one of those things where I'm just trying to wrap my mind around it, but we also have to remember that as they told us in season 1, time works differently in the TVA. It does not
Yeah.
operate the same way as it would in real life. This is obviously all fiction and fantasy anyway, but once you start to just like remember that, then I think you just have to sort of let yourself go and let it wash over you to think like, well, anything is practically possible. And you're looking at Loki go through this extremely, what looks like to be an extremely painful process of time slipping. And it's also kind of frightening because he could time slip literally at any point in any time. And there's multiple times where he time slips in front of somebody and they scream like, oh my God, like where did you come from? It's a really, really crazy process. But that frantic nature and that frantic pace that they established here was just such a good way to introduce us. And I also love one of the things that they did. You talked about this in your initial sort of opening snapshot, the way that this is shot, because one of the things that I really admired about season 1 was its cinematography, but it was often very much stationary photography and very
Mhm.
still, very much, probably on a dolly or on a crane. This is obviously so much more handheld stuff that's going on. And I think that's to
Yeah.
reflect the chaotic nature, the running and the back and forth and the fast conversations. And you really don't get the chance to sort of explain fully your thoughts while you're still trying to process everything. All of that stuff just added to the feeling of it. It's like watching a high octane early 2000s action movie, where things are just moving at such a rapid pace. And so I
Mhm.
love that small little change because this does feel different when you watch it. It's like this doesn't feel as put together as season 1. It doesn't feel as clean, and it's probably meant to feel that way just because things are in disarray at this point in time. But we're also introduced to quite a few new characters in this season, which, most great shows are going to introduce new characters as you continue to tell the story. And because Judge Renslayer, Ravonna Renslayer, is nowhere to be found, she's missing, played by Gugu Mbatha Raw. Now a new council is pretty much in charge, and we get to meet quite a few new characters a part of this council. We have Rafael Casal coming in here as Hunter X5. Neil
Yeah.
Elise is also Hunter D90. Katie Dickey is General Dox, and Liz Carr is Judge Gamble. They sort of make up, I think, these new leaders of the TVA, at least for now. And Rafael Casal's character is Hunter X5. He's a hunter just like Hunter B15, but he's obviously sort of coming down, I think, with a little bit more of an antagonistic approach based on what's happening because him and Hunter B15 have a lot
Mhm.
going on between each other. There's obviously some tension there. What did you think about just sort of the new, sort of introduction of all these people that seem like they're going to have very, very important roles, for the rest of the season and probably are going to act as, at least within the TVA, our main antagonists?
Man, it's so interesting because they all feel like they're not on the side of our protagonist, right? They it's interesting to instantly meet characters and you're already side eyeing them immediately, given everything that's going on. Because initially, I see Rafael Casal, I like Rafael Casal and blind spotting and things like that. You see him, you're like, oh, shoot, Rafael Casal, and then you're like, wait, is this the villain? Like, what's going on here? Why are you like this? Why are you already an asshole? But it's good seeing him. I'm glad he's here, but that relationship between him and Kate Dickey as General Dox is weird. I have no idea what's going on there, but the moment in which they do some weird mom son thing head to head, I don't know what's happening. It felt I don't know. Relationships in the TVA feel very weird across the board. I don't know what's happening here, but
It felt like it might have been a nod to Game of Thrones, like her same character in Game of Thrones, where she has this
mhm.
really, really weird relationship with her son. Like it's too
It's
touchy
too
feely. It's too close. Like that's your son,
too
and you got this man, and he's like a grown boy in Game of Thrones. He's like at
he
least 12 or
is.
something like that, and she's like very
Yeah.
much like coddling him at that age. So I think it might have been a nod to that, but like you say, it's a weird relationship, and we don't really know what to make
Mhm.
of it.
I know, but and you know what's important because they wouldn't spend time on it, right? It was like a very much like they sat on that for a little bit,
Yeah.
like the timekeepers might have been wrong or whatever, but their ideas weren't or whatever she said. I was like, Okay, whatever that means. We'll continue to explore that later, I'm sure. I actually can't wait to explore that. But again, as weird as it was, I love that it felt like something that was going to eventually come to fruition in the future that we could see play out. So that's something else that I'm absolutely looking for here. Everybody else, man, I just don't know, right? Don't know yet. Like the other judges are like, they kind of seem like they're on the side of whatever the TVA has going on, but all of these characters in general, it beyond again Hunter X5 and General Docs, they just feel like kind of what B15 was saying, where it's very hard to wrap your head around everything being different, right? And so as somebody who was hearing that, as old as like Judge Gamble seems to be, right? As hearing something like that, how can you not be partial to what has ever coming out of the mouths of Loki and B15 in Mobius? How can you possibly be on their side? Again, eventually she says, okay, we need to stop pruning these timelines, thankfully. But even if she went the other way, I love how she heard both sides, by the way. Even if she went the other way, I couldn't immediately be surprised if she did, because that is all they have grown to know. Their memories get wiped, and then it's whatever is best for the TVA. So it's a very interesting concept, I think, that we'll also see to play in how the members of the TVA, how the judges of the TVA, how other B units of the TVA learn about their true origins and where they come from.
Yeah, this was a really, really, I think, fascinating way to just establish the power dynamics within the TVA and really just expand this world because, as you said, the opposition is clear now. Amongst these characters, when you look on one side, you have B15, who now knows the truth of her origin
Mm-hmm.
and of the origin of anybody that works in the TVA. That this place is very much contributing to a lot of atrocities across the timeline. Like we are
Yeah.
ruining people's lives and their existence and doing what we're doing under a very, very false pretense. And she's trying to make that case. And so she's becoming, I think, the beacon of change for the TVA. But conversely, on the other side, you still have this, you have this leadership that's stepping in the absence of Ravonna Renslayer, and they're completely unmoved by any of that. Like they think that this changes nothing, even though we have the head of a fake timekeeper laying on the war council table. Like it's literally right there. The judges who they thought were the creators of the TVA, that's now been proven to just be a fallacy. It's not real. And the head is like
Right.
right there, but nobody is like, yeah, we should probably just take a second and just like completely ask all of the questions we need to ask. And I think that Judge Gamble, is sort of like balancing the middle, sort of like road of where one can stand on that argument. But when you look at General Docs, she's like very much headstrong about this whole thing that they just need to proceed forward. They need to find Sylvie first and foremost because she's considered a criminal of the
Right.
timeline, and we need to maintain order here. So she's going to utilize Rafael Casal's character. She's going to utilize the judge to her advantage to try to keep things in order. And I think that that's just like a really fascinating way to unpack that the TVA is actually, it's a pretty bad organization. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not an organization that's really here meant to do good because the way it was founded, although He Who Remains says it was done so to keep things in order and to prevent a multiversal war. I don't know if we could take any of that shit for truth, just because it's
Yeah.
like, well, all of your variants are really fucked up and crazy. And based on everything you've explained and what's apparently gonna come, like you're not doing something good to prevent this. In actuality, you are still wiping people's minds and taking over their lives and completely changing the meaning of their
Mm-hmm.
existence to serve as whatever it is that you want to achieve. And so I just love that within the TVA that you can have these real characters sort of exemplify that. He Who Remains hasn't come back around in the season, or Kang at all, and so you need that TVA presence to sort of identify that as well. And so that's a really, really strong thing. But with Hunter B15, like, what do you think about where she might go in this season, and where her
Mm-hmm.
story might take her? Because she used to kind of be similar in season one, where she was very much of the mission. She was probably the most mistrusting of Loki, and I think that that's like
Yeah.
very, very emblematic of how much she's grown once she did see the truth. And she ultimately revealed the truth to Sylvie as well. Like she was very important. And now, like, she's the one TVA agent, at least it seems for now, that's going to be the one to try to like snap people out of this and get them to wake up. What do you think about what her future sort of trajectory in this season might foretell about just the status of the TVA and where we could see this organization go?
Yeah, somebody who has been purging timelines since literally that's all she knows, right? I love that she has to, or I feel like at some point she's gonna feel like that she has to be one of the champions that gets things in order now, understanding that all these timelines exist and that we cannot prune them anymore, understanding that I think Loki and Mobius are, what we've seen at the end of what movie was that? It was maybe Miss Marvel. What was it? When did we see the what was that flashback we've seen with Kang in the back?
Oh, that was
What movie was that?
Quantumania.
Quantumania. That's what I
Yeah.
mean. The end of Quantumania, I feel like those two are going to end up going on some crazy adventure, right? Where they are not tied to the TVA. They cannot be there in those moments as the TVA is getting things together. But it is B-15 who's going to be around again, having to champion, having to lead the charge in getting the TVA together and understanding that there may be some new shit that they got to do in order to save these different timelines of humanity of what's going on. They have to rectify all the mistakes that they have been making, and it's going to take her, again, somebody who knows the ins and outs, someone who has been purging timelines, to oppose some of these other people within the TVA who's going to, who might be on the side of Kang or He Who Remains. She's going to have to oppose that and really be the force in the driving nature that brings people home and I guess on the side of justice, right? So she's low key turning into a superhero in real time. Like we're watching her turn into a superhero in real time. And I think I love that, right? There's no Renslayer around. There's no lot of other people around to do that. Again, I think Loki and Mobius are going to dip out. It's going to be up to B-15, I think, to kind of keep things in place and grow the TVA to a different organization.
Yeah, I totally agree. She has to really carry forth that mission because now she's in a place where she's seen the truth. And it's incredibly, incredibly difficult to like all of a sudden get people to change their mind about what they have known to be true for probably what they think is their entire lives. They just think like, oh, I was created at the TVA. I was created to be an agent. I was created to prune branches of timelines, and that's what I'm here to do. And it appears that there's like thousands of workers in the TVA. This is probably a pretty massive organization. And then all of a sudden to say like, yeah, that's all bullshit. It's not real because look at this dead fucking timekeeper's head on the table, and there's this
Giving
other sort of
severance.
no, that's actually so true. It's very much like that. And then there's like this omnipotent force out there who
Mm-hmm.
apparently is pulling all the strings, but we don't know who it is. Nobody's ever seen him before. And you want
Yeah.
us to believe you that the TVA is all of a sudden like this bad organization, but that's going to be a great journey for her to go on because she says like the TVA has to change and it has to start now. We can't go back to pruning those branches. And for the time being, the judge, was able to say like we're no longer going to do that. But that also creates like a ton of disarray and chaos. Like there's a lot of branches that are, apparently going off of the beaten path. And so what might that mean for Loki and Mobius's journeys? Because we clearly see that there's going to be time travel here. So is that also going to create additional branches? Are they going to run into branches that have already sort of, gone off the beaten path? Like it's going to get kind of crazy, I think,
Yeah.
and to see the ramifications of it. So I'm very, very interested to see how they start to unpack that stuff. It'll be really cool. Let's talk about some of these new locations in the TVA. One of the things that I
Mhm.
really, really enjoy, not only about this episode, but this entire series, is just its ability to world build on such a grand scale and to do so, I think,
Yeah.
just so expertly. I remember when we gave out our MCU Phase 4 awards, my favorite location, my favorite new location that was introduced was the TVA. And they have managed to just introduce even more elements, even more areas that we were not familiar with in season 1 and just really expand this world even more. We got to see the war room at the beginning, this war council sort of room that has, sort of behind the facade, there's this mural of Kang the Conqueror heads all across it. And even Loki reveals that and nobody's like moved by it. Everybody's just like, oh, well, okay. What does that really say about anything? And it's just kind of crazy. All the evidence is there, but nobody's changing their stance. But you have a really, really cool and I think beautifully designed war room. And then there's also that temporal loom that gets introduced at the end of the episode. We'll get to in a second.
Mhm.
That's like this weird sort of like underground area of the TVA that has, I think, sort of like the makeup or the exoskeleton of the timeline. It's hard to explain really if you can't see it. And then of course like the repairs and advancement division, which is where the character OB or Boros is pretty much, that's his domain. We get to see all these new places. We get to see these hallways. We get to see the colors and the way they pop out, and come to life on the screen. What did you think about just the expansiveness of the TVA, all these places that we weren't familiar with in season one, and now they're taking this opportunity with season two to make this world even bigger than what we initially knew.
Yeah, it makes it feel we do talk about the TVA a lot, but as just a very important setting, just adds to it. It adds to what the character of the TVA is supposed to be, right? I feel like there's going to be moments where in our mind we're supposed to call back to the war room and actually call it the war room, you know what I mean, and call back to these other parts of the TVA that we can then recognize. Even early in the episode when he runs into what's the guy's name with the Walkman with the headphones on, I
Oh
always forget his
yeah.
name. But we had seen that room before, right? We had revisited the room that Loki crashed in, with the car and the TV falls. We've been in that room before, and so I love that we're establishing, not only the TVA, but even this TV show as something, as someone as a mainstay, right? Because a lot of TV shows, your favorite TV shows, you're like, oh yeah, I know what that room is. Somebody can show you right now a picture of a room of some of your favorite TV shows, and you know exactly what room it is. And I feel like they're doing that, right? I feel like with introducing some of these new places, and not only that, but these places have meaning and reason. Going to where Ouroboros is, right, is a reason for that. It's a room in which he operates and does a lot of very important things in there. You know what I mean? And so it just feels like they're just adding to the lore mythos of the TVA, because they are not going anywhere. I'll talk about that more later, what the TVA has going on, but this is definitely an organization in a place that, again, I see being a part of the MCU for these next couple phases. And I think in doing that, why not give it more character? Why not give it more setting? Why not give it more purpose? And I think that's exactly what they're doing.
I was just kind of amazed at watching just the expansiveness of the TVA and what they've added to what we already knew to be true in season one. And I was so impressed by this because we've been critical about Marvel and maybe they're over reliant on green screens and sets down in Atlanta where it's like clearly this is not a real place. But
Mm-hmm.
the TVA feels so real and feels
It
so
does.
lived in because they have built these sets, those hallways, those rooms, the war room, the RNA division. Those are real sets with thousands of intricate set pieces and little designs and devices that are just placed all throughout this place where it's like, oh my goodness, I want to go here. I want to walk through these halls. I want to see what this feels
Mhm.
like. And everything is so consistent and so in line with just like what they've established with the branding of Loki. I love the colors, the greens and the browns and the
Yeah.
oranges. That stuff
Mhm.
is super consistent. The way that the hallways look grungy and dirty, but also kind of simultaneously futuristic at the same time. A lot of this feels like the 70s, but it feels like a futuristic 70s. Like it feels like
Mhm.
it's set in the past, but also like it's timeless at the same time. Like
Yep.
that's the brilliance of what they've come up with. And a lot of that was in season one, but they are just blowing it up in an even bigger fashion. This is one of the best looking MCU projects of the past 5 years and maybe ever in their existence. I'm just so impressed with how they
Agreed.
continue to build out this world and every new like new location that we go to. I'm just like, yo, this is real. Like, can we just take a second to like really acknowledge like they built this, like that RNA division and that
Mhm.
set for Ouroboros? It's crazy. It's crazy how many small intricate details are in that set. I can't wait till the behind the scenes comes out and we
Yeah.
can just like spend 5 minutes going through all the stuff. And there's probably thousands of Easter eggs that we haven't even picked up yet because we
Right.
can't, we can't pick up everything just on a first watch or a second watch. And so I'm just so impressed with the work there. And I can't wait to hopefully even see more areas of the TVA and obviously all these other places that they go to outside of the TVA because we know we're going to get a lot of that as well. But let's talk about Ouroboros. This is a brand new
Yeah.
character played by Academy Award winner. It feels so good to say that about him. Academy
I
Award winner
know.
Ki Kwan. We knew he was coming in this season. He's fresh off of the heels of that Academy Award win. And, one of the things that they say about movies, like one of the constant sayings is that all movies are connected. Somehow, some way, all movies are connected. And I do believe that when you watch enough movies, you can start to see the connections. But what's interesting is that the filmmakers behind Everything Everywhere All at Once were initially going to be the filmmakers behind Loki season one. They were initially
Mhm.
tapped to develop that season, decided to bow out and instead make Everything Everywhere All at Once. Seems like it worked out for everybody in the end. I think that was a good decision for them to bow out and do
Yeah.
that. Ki Kwan picks up an Oscar. That movie goes on hugely, hugely successful. Probably the best movie of 2022. But now Marvel decides to give Ki Kwan the call and say, Well, come on. Let's add you to the cast of Loki season 2. And not only that, it seems like he's going to play a very important character in Ouroboros, and we get a whole segment with him. Loki and Mobius, they go down to meet him to figure out like what's going on with Loki.
Mhm.
It's this time slipping thing that they just can't make sense of. So what did you think about just Ki Kwan coming in here as this brand new character, the time that we get to spend with him, all of the funny sort of interactions between him and Mobius and Loki, of course. And ultimately, like, I think the reason is as to why he's here is to really kind of explain these anomalies that we just can't make sense of whenever they occur in the TVA.
Man, I love, love, love his inclusion here, man. Like you said, all things are connected. Even his character, though very different from who he is in Everything Everywhere All at Once, it's just the idea of time and the way things move. It's like, of course, you would be here in this room playing Ouroboros, man. One thing I really love is the name Ouroboros, first and foremost. Like the Ouroboros is what, like a never-ending snake, right? That bites its tail, and it's always that it has the same beginning and the same end, and it repeats over and over. I love that because Mobius is kind of tied to that, like that idea, right? Where a Mobius strip is just like a piece of paper turned a little bit taped together, but
Yeah.
it's still like ever going, right? I love how like they're connected in that way. Though a Mobius strip and Ouroboros are slightly different, it gets complicated. Go look it up or Reddit it or something. I don't know. Though though they are slightly different, I still love that idea that both of them are, in my mind, keepers of time, right? Like if somebody was like, "Hey, TVA, we need new keepers of time," I would vote for OB and Mobius first and foremost. You know what I'm saying? Of course, because it's in the name. It's like, yeah, they need to be the keepers of time. As anybody's going to be looking after this. But I love what you said though, that he can be used as somewhat this walking dictionary, this walking encyclopedia of all the weird shit that the TVA has going on. Because again, all of this is very tricky, right? All of these concepts are very tricky. Time slipping, what? You know what I mean? Who else can make sense of that? I love that they interject him in here to say, no, this is what's happening, this is what's going on. Not only that, I helped build a lot of the stuff in the TVA. That's going to mean a lot later. I know it. Like he said, he's like, oh yeah, this is manual, blah, 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 blah. Oh, and I wrote it. Oh, okay. So you're everything that we need to know about the
It's like he wrote the
TVA,
Bible essentially for the
the Bible
TVA.
to the TVA. Like, oh, you're the person that we need to go to. So I love that he's here. Not only that, but he does feel like a temporary replacement for what Miss Minutes was supposed to be, right? Miss Minutes initially felt like the one that was supposed to tell us everything that the TVA was, but now that we see that she's not who she says she is, it feels like we've now reverted to somebody more honest, somebody who's really just been in the trenches working, not working for He Who Remains. And so I love that. That kind of feels like a small replacement as well, in way of that. So man, I love the inclusion of Ouroboros here. I think he's going to be popping up a lot more. This isn't just like a one-off, two-off thing. I think he really is going to be important to get us to understand some of these future beats with the TVA.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Ki Kwan getting an episode named after his character in the first
Crazy.
appearance. Like that's a really high watermark there. But this is perfect casting. This is literally perfect casting because Ki Kwan, his comedic timing is amazing. His quirkiness is
Mhm.
incredible. You can buy into the fact that he would be a genius. He feels like somebody that has all the information that would be very much knowledgeable about all of the ins and outs of the TVA. And as you know, really pointed out, and I think a great way, he created a lot of these devices. He created some of these concepts, or if he didn't at least create them, he knows about them probably more so than anybody else in the TVA. He's a one man division. Nobody else works down there with him, and he
Mhm.
never leaves. So he can never probably be influenced by He Who Remains. You know, to your point
Right.
about possibly replacing Miss Minutes, who used to be, I think, somewhat the face of the TVA. She was kind of
Right.
that representative of explaining things and talking about the multiverse of war. Turns out she's a fucking turncoat, but be that as it may, Ki Kwan's character Ouroboros is like somebody that's definitely been down in the trenches, just like working on his own. And I love the comedic stuff between him and Mobius. Like they don't even
Fire.
remember the last time that they spoke. It's like, oh, what's it been? 400 years? Like that's a long fucking time. And Mobius knows, like in the back of his head, like, you know, I probably didn't come down here. And if I did, I kept it real short because I didn't want to talk to you,
Mhm.
didn't want you explaining all this stuff. I had to go somewhere, you know, and I'm sure Ouroboros, he doesn't really get an opportunity to talk to too many people. He just works and works and
Right.
works, you know, and he gets so many
Mhm.
requests and has so many things to do. But it was great. And it was great to see the time slipping, not only him explaining it, but also in real time, kind of see how it works. Cause again, I
Mhm.
was kind of confused at like what was going on, but there's that really important scene where they're still in the RNA division, and OB is explaining to Mobius and Loki what's happening. Loki time slips to the past, which I think it might have been like 400 years in the past at least, or maybe even more. And he meets OB in the past. And while he's feeding him information, the OB in the present is starting to remember that. I thought
They
that
got
that
some
was
fire
like
memories.
that was the coolest part
Yeah.
of the episode to me, because I'm like, oh wow, that would be like something that makes sense where it's like working in real time. He's having the
Mm-hmm.
conversation while Mobius is still in the present. And so the past is starting to feed the information to the present, but also like unintentionally. And we're seeing it all just like all develop in real time. Like, what did you think about just sort of the seamlessness of that sequence, and how OB is starting to like pick up these things, and all of a sudden he can now like actively give them, I think, a solution to how to stop this time slipping for Loki.
Yeah, I'm interested if they'll continue to use that device as, you know, something for storytelling in the future. But I really like that, man. I think that's like there's so many dang time theories and way to explain time in a lot of these things. But I think that's the bootstrap theory or whatever, right? You go back in time and yeah, and I just thought it was really cool to see. But again, I'm wondering if they'll do other time tricks like that throughout this series, because now it not only feels like it's just for the time being, right? It also feels like, okay, maybe there's some other things in time that they can continue to explain to us that carries on throughout the season, because this doesn't, yeah, it just doesn't feel like a one-off to me. It feels like, okay, maybe the next episode they have to do this thing. Oh, but you remember how Loki was time slipping and he had to go back in time to I'm like, I think all of this feels very intentional, especially because it is an episode one of a season. It does feel like they're giving us the tools to potentially understand some of these other things that might happen later in the season. So I absolutely love it. I love when people do things like that. Both of us love like Back to the Future. You know what I mean? Like I'm here for this. Like this is what I'm here for, man. This is the kind of stuff I love to see. And though again, stuff like Endgame wasn't perfect, I still love the time, everything in Endgame. I was like, yeah, let's do this time stuff. Like it can be really cool if done correctly. Because a lot we've also seen time stuff not done so well either. But yeah, I'm having a good time with it, and I hope they continue to. I think I think also what makes this cool is they understand the audience isn't dumb. Does that make sense? They're explaining it to us and giving it to us without holding our hands completely. And I think that's a very good way to convey a lot of these ideas. And so I hope they continue to do it in this way too. Make it cool, make it funny even, because it was also funny, but it's also informative on what some of the potential that these concepts have throughout the show.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, yeah, the audience is not dumb and can pick up on stuff, but I will admit I was confused for a while, especially once we get to like the temporal room and the
Mm-hmm.
device. Like I watched this 3 times and it's still not clear to me. I'm still like, well, what
Mm-hmm.
exactly are we doing? Like, I know we're trying to stop the time slipping, but they have to prune Loki in order to achieve that. Like that stuff didn't feel clear to me, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think that there's like an inherent absurdity to all this. Obviously, like we know that this is
Right.
like sci-fi storytelling, so it is one of those things. It's almost like Chris Nolan with Tenet. Like, don't try to think about it, just feel it. Just let it happen. Which Tenet was very
It's
frustrating
it's
because I
hard.
tried to let it go, and I'm just like, yo, this is
It's
blowing my mind right
it's
now.
hard.
But I think Loki is gonna have a lot of fun with it. I think that some of these
Mhm.
things are very digestible. Like Loki being in the past, talking to OB, and OB in the present, starting to remember things because it's happening at the same time. Like that feels very tangible, and that makes sense to me. Some of the other stuff, maybe not so much, but that really just might not be the point of it, because I think that there's going to be bigger issues at play while they still try to actively use some of these devices and tricks and some of these sci-fi tropes, to really enhance the story, because, this being a time story, there's always going to be like really weird stuff that can't be explained because it's all made up at the end of the day. It's all
Mhm.
gobbledygook, but that's kind of the fun behind it, and I think that's going to be a really cool thing. But that brings us to sort of that big final sequence when we are trying to sort of save Loki, prevent the time slipping. He has to get pruned. There's that big room, with the temporal loom sort of situation, and it's a very, I think, harrowing sequence because they
Mhm.
are racing against time, and Mobius has to sort of get out in the field himself. He puts on this ridiculously huge suit. It looks like a space suit in order to
Mhm.
go, sort of save Loki. Loki is in the past, I believe, at that particular moment, and runs into
Yep.
Sylvie on the elevator. That's the one time that he's seen her ever since they had their interaction with He Who Remains. And so it was a pretty intense sequence. And for a while there, you don't really know what's going to happen. Loki's life is pretty much at stake because Obi explains, like, we might lose him to time forever if this doesn't work out. And so I was less interested in the rules and like what actually had to happen versus just the emotion behind it. The fact that, like, yeah, Loki, like, you're in a very, very harrowing position. And so we have to race
Mhm.
against time and figure this out in order for this journey to continue. Naturally, we know it's going to continue, but I think that they still managed to raise the stakes and make you feel like that there was like a true threat at hand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially he gets pruned and you don't know who the hell pruned him. It was like, wait a second, who is this person? But you're right though. It feels scary. It's a moment where you feel like you need to yell at the TV because Loki, you're like, what are you doing? You're just walking around. You've seen that the device you've been given has turned green. Why aren't you pruning yourself? What are we doing? Is Sylvie that important to you to die forever or to be lost through time forever? What is happening? And I think it's not a lot that can get me to want to yell at the screen like, dude, what are you doing? But that moment, I think they do a good job of all the explanation of them of raising the stakes. I mean, Mobius is writing skin question mark on the on the computer, like he doesn't want to lose his skin. We don't want to lose Loki forever. Like they just do a really good job of being like, no, this is important. In fact, they even take time in the elevator. Mobius literally stops Loki and is like, okay, he who remains, I get it. But right now, we need to figure out you know, and that really carries throughout the rest of the episode. And so I really appreciate us feeling, like you said, that emotional that emotional pull that they have there, because it's like, skip the rules, dude. What are you doing? If you don't hurry up, we're gonna lose it. And again, fortunately, he does end up getting pruned by whoever. I can't wait to figure out who that is. There's so many theories going on out there, but I really can't wait to see yeah, and who gets revealed as the person who pruned Loki.
Yeah, the emotion of the scene takes priority over the rules. Like that becomes secondary. That's just,
Mm-hmm.
that's exposition to explain what's happening. But it's really like, as you said, like, Loki, you don't have time to be doing this. Like, you need to figure this out as quickly as possible so that you can start to like work actively against He Who Remains and continue your journey there. Before the episode ends, we also see General Dox takes like more than a dozen TVA agents to go search for Sylvie. And there's that really, really important line, I think, that's going to probably speak to, her
Mm-hmm.
story and what she does. But Hunter D90 says to Hunter B15, like, all this for one person? Like, why do we need all these agents going to search for
Mm-hmm.
Sylvie? What do you think that that possibly says about General Dox's character? I know we talked about her earlier, but what do you think that that says about just her intentions and what she's actively trying to achieve, and the fact that she's taking a lot of resources to go search for one person who, admittedly, Sylvie is dangerous. Like, she's capable of a lot. She is a Loki,
Yeah.
but it does feel like a little bit of overkill to really probably take all of your best agents to go search for this one person, and you don't actually have any leads or active information to find out where she is.
Yeah, and B15 even says, I don't buy that. Like right after, he says that. I was like, it's a very good point. Because to be honest, they didn't say that. I'd be like, oh, they're gonna get Sylvie. I wouldn't have said that, thought about it twice. So I was like, wait, that is a lot of people. What's going on here? And so I think General Docs, man, I can't figure it out completely, because that is that line she says to Hunter X5 that is like, the timekeepers weren't real or whatever, but their ideas were. I think there's something tying her to the ideas that the timekeepers gave her, or the ideas that she knows. In fact, even maybe she could even know the secrets, right, of what's really going on here. I don't know how, I don't know where she figured that stuff out, but she knows things that I think other people don't know, and that makes her not only interesting but also dangerous, right? Why is she has command of all these people to do that. She has, the fact that she can tell people to send people, all these people to Sylvie, is scary, because she can do that for anything, right? She is one of the few people now that we see. It's like her in X5. Everybody else is just kind of following orders, but she is one of the people that's like, nah, we still need to purge these timelines. Although General Judge Gamble voted, not to do that,
Right.
she's still very much dangerous. She still very much is on the opposition. And so man, to be honest, I'm not sure everything that she has going on, but I think that makes her more interesting in that way. It makes her more I think more complicated as her being painted as a villain right now at this time, and it does, and I can't wait to see whatever she has up her sleeve, because I think she's definitely gonna come up to be one of the more formidable low-key people of the season.
Yeah, it is really hard to pinpoint because of just the lack of information, but there's obviously, I think, an ulterior motive there. Who knows what that can be? Maybe she's trying to go, I don't know, maybe wipe the minds of other people and turn them into TVA agents to build up an army, or maybe she wants control of the TVA herself. Maybe she sees an
Hmm.
opportunity and wants to step
Yep.
in and be what Judge Renslayer was and take over that position and
Hmm.
kind of be the right hand person to not the timekeepers anymore, but ultimately he who remains. Maybe she already knows about
Hmm.
he who remains. You know, there that
Exactly.
that could be a potentiality as well. And so can't wait to see what the journey of this character is. And villains are always so great. They're always so like sadistic, and you can do so many things with them, especially now. Like there's so much to dig into, and just like the
Yeah.
nature of this place is like, yo, this is a fucked up situation y'all got people in. So you could really, I think, go to some really deep and dark places. And so I hope that they do that. And Katie Dickey, I think she's a great actress to illustrate that as well. You know, she
Hmm.
she definitely brings a presence of somebody to not trust and also somebody to fear as well. So I'm very much anticipating that. But that brings us to the mid credit scene. We finally get some active time with Sylvie. We see that she's in 1982 in Oklahoma, and she goes to McDonald's and she orders everything off the menu. The guy is like very, very helpful. He's like, "What do you want? We got these brand new McNuggets that you can try out." It's like brand new McNuggets in 1982. What a time that was for McDonald's. But I mean, they are creating an old school looking McDonald's, like a one for one. I mean, I wasn't born in the 80s. I didn't grow up in the 80s, but I've seen photos, I've seen pictures. I mean, that looks
Right.
exactly how they used to look. So again, the set design, the production design here is just a 10 out of 10 across the board. But what do you make of this? Like, there's so many questions. Like, now Sylvie is free. I think what's really interesting based off of the end of the first season is that her journey and her arc was completed. You know, her whole purpose was to find who's behind the TVA and to take them
Hmm.
out, to exact revenge on whoever was responsible for removing her from her life, you know, and changing just the course of her journey forever. She achieved that. She killed he who remains, and so now she's apparently free, and she decides to go to Oklahoma in 1982. Why? She had the entire timeline at her disposal. What do you make of that? Why do you think she might have chose Oklahoma in 1982? What could that all sort of potentially point to for her journey for the rest of the season?
Man, it's so interesting, and all you can really do is research, right? Because Broxton, Oklahoma. How often I don't, how often have you ever heard Broxton, Oklahoma in a sentence, like, or even brought up at all? And even then, even with research, there's not much, right? There's the one comic run from Thor, where he goes back to Broxton, Oklahoma to create New Asgard. That's pretty much close to it in terms of what the heck Broxton, Oklahoma, I think it's supposed to mean. And so I really don't know. I think they might have a new purpose for it. That could be just an Easter egg, right? Just happens to be where she lands, Asgard. That could be just an Easter egg. And so I really don't know. I think the importance of it all is kind of that more controversial topic that they bring back up with that very last shot where she's like sees two people eating McDonald's and seemingly in love. That's like the thing I can get out of it the most is like that she still longs, of course, not only for potentially a relationship, but potentially a relationship with the Loki that we know. Like, oh, I miss him, or whatever's going on there. That's the thing that I can pull out the most, man. But I really don't know. My only other question is, how the heck she gonna pay for McDonald's? She got McDonald's money. You know what I'm saying? Like, did she bring cash with her? Like, I just don't understand
Doubt
how
that.
she's supposed to pay for this stuff, man. She wants food, and he's gonna be like, all right, that'll be shoot, 1982, that'd be 95 cents. I don't know how much stuff costs back then. That'd be 95 cents. She's gonna be like, what is that? What are even cents? And give him something crazy. But man, again, that's the only thing I can get from it is the love aspect. I think that's what they were trying to do. Have fun with the McDonald's kind of throwback, but I think it's really is her longing for that companionship that's important here.
Yeah, can you imagine episode 2 starts with a fucking heist? Sylvie sticks up McDonald's because she can't pay for it, so she has to steal the quarter pounders and McNuggets. That would be hilarious. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions here. I mean, firstly, what I want to say before getting into it, they did this really cool pop up in New York. I didn't get a chance to go to it. It's like deep in
Mhm.
Brooklyn, but they did a pop up recreating a 1980s McDonald's, here in New
Mm.
York City, but it was, way deep. I think it was like in Bensonhurst. I wasn't going to Bensonhurst, it was way too far.
Oh
But
no.
not doing that. But I thought that was like a really cool tie-in to, sort of help, bring that to life with the marketing. But there are, like you said, difficult sort of signs that might point to it in the research. There are some ties, I think, to Oklahoma and the Sylvie and Chantress, sort of amalgamation characters in the
Mhm.
comics, but it seems like they're going to go in somewhat of a different direction. The only thing I could think of is that this place probably has some significance to her. Like maybe she
Mhm.
grew up in Broxton. Maybe her version of Asgard is like, I don't know, maybe somewhat
Mm.
connected to that. Maybe like Asgard is outside of Oklahoma. Like you never know. Cause like,
Yeah.
even though Asgard has been presented as like this sort of extraterrestrial, possibly outer space sort of dimension, we now see in the current day MCU that new Asgard is very much on Earth. It's in a real
Exactly.
place, and so
Mhm.
who's to say that her version of Asgard might not have existed on Earth? It could be like a connection there, and maybe she visited previously, like her version
Mhm.
of Midgard. She might have ended up in Oklahoma, and the '80s in particular is also like something that sticks out. And I think,
Yeah.
based on Sylvie's age, she probably came of age in the '80s. She was probably younger, or I don't know. It's hard to really tell like what that might all signal to, but when she walks in and she looks at everybody just, eating and laughing, there's a lot of innocence there. And Sylvie, one of the tragic elements to her character is that she never really had a childhood. She never got to grow
Mhm.
up. She never could really experience what any of that meant for her and have a true sort of coming of age. And so perhaps she's just trying to tap into that. And she just found the first place that sort of is emblematic of that. And I know we've seen based off of like the trailers that she's eventually going to get a job at this McDonald's. Like she's eventually going to work there. Why? I don't know. Probably just to lead an ordinary life and be off the grid. It could just
Mhm.
be that simple. But again, why McDonald's? Why here? Why 1982? There's so many questions to that. I can't wait until they start to really unwrap that later in the season. But before we wrap up here, man, before we sort of close out this review of the season 2 premiere of Loki, there are still a lot of chess pieces that are unclear, right? We don't know exactly where Miss Minutes is. She's probably with some version of Kang because He Who Remains is
Mhm.
now dead.
Right.
What versions of Kang will we see? There's already been a tease in Quantum Mania. What might his story entail for this season? How much of a force will he be in the future of the
Mhm.
of the of the storytelling in the season? And then also, again, pointing back to that post credit scene in Quantum Mania and some of the trailers and the marketing, we do see that there is some sort of time travel adventure between Mobius and Loki. They
Right.
apparently go to multiple different timelines. They obviously are going to have to go to 1982 at some point because that's where Sylvie is. They're going to go way back to some sort of like pre-Renaissance time. It looks like, I mean, like the 1800s. I mean, who
Mhm.
knows how many different time periods we'll visit, but I'm just curious, from your perspective, pure speculation, obviously, because we have not seen the first 4 episodes like many critics have. What do
Right.
you think that this might all entail for the conflict between Loki, Mobius, and whatever version of Kang we ultimately see later this season?
I still think at some point they'll figure out one of the only ways to defeat and conquer, I guess, the idea of Kang is Kang himself, right? And I think they're literally searching for the Kang that can help them do that. I think they'll run into Kangs that they'll find out is not the Kang that they hoping to find, and that's the bad Kang, and eventually run into the Kang that might be able to help them overcome the Kang that they need to overcome. And so I'm that's what I really think is happening here, man. And I hope along the way I think they'll have Easter eggs for other things as well. But I really think that for me, in my mind, that's the goal. How let's find the one Kang that's similar to He Who Remains, though He Who Remains not necessarily a hero, right? He was the one at least that had his head on straight. That was like, I'm not trying to start no wars, and maybe the worst way to go about it, but I'm not trying to start no wars. They're going back in time to find the Kang to be like, all right, this is what we need to do to stop the bad Kang. That's my idea right now of what they're trying to do, and that's what I'm gonna continue to stick with.
That's a really good theory, I think, because we have already seen Victor Timely, and
Mm-hmm.
perhaps Victor Timely is the version of Kang that is a little bit more helpful, probably also more knowledgeable, because I would imagine Victor Timely, who is very tied into time travel,
Yeah.
especially in a time period where science was not as advanced as it ultimately becomes. I would imagine that he could really speak to a lot of those things, and maybe he
Mhm.
invents something, or maybe he has invented something that they need, that's ultimately going to aid in this battle against Kang.
Right.
And also, I'm just kind of still curious about. I mean, Fantastic Four is like right there, right? And the Nathaniel Richards of it all,
Yeah.
and like what that
Mhm.
might mean, and
That's important.
I don't know if they're gonna point to that or if they're gonna allude to that, but that's just looming in the background. I might be getting ahead of myself, but are Nathaniel Richards and Victor Timely the same person? Maybe, possibly. They probably are,
Mhm.
or they could not be. They could change up that origin and go a different direction. But man, I think that's what makes Loki just so intriguing and so exciting, and really kind of their best effort in terms of TV, because the possibilities are almost endless. I think that
Yeah.
this really points to what the best of this could be for the Multiverse Saga, what the best of this storytelling could be for the Kang Dynasty and for Secret Wars.
Exactly.
I do imagine that by the end of this series, because critics have only seen the first four, they didn't release five, they didn't release six, so clearly those last two episodes are going to be very, very important. I would
Mhm.
almost have to imagine that the end of the season is going to directly set up and tie into the Kang Dynasty. Like, I can't
Yeah.
see a version or a world where that does not happen. We'll obviously litigate that once we arrive there at the end of the
Yeah.
series, but we're only a couple years away from that right now. And they haven't spoken to a season 3 of Loki. This might be sort of the end of that journey for now until we get to those movies. But I think somehow, some way, Kang obviously won't be defeated. There's going to have to be some sort of setup, some sort of cliffhanger, some sort of tie-in to what we get with those two
And
Avengers movies.
we also have to see this tie in to Deadpool, right?
Oh
In
man,
Wolverine, because we actually know the TVA is going to be part of that film,
that's right.
because
Yes.
that's where Wolverine comes from, is all this time jumping things that we have going on. So not only that, but they got some low key mutant stuff on their hands too. But mainly they got some time stuff to tie into to Deadpool 3 as well.
Wow. That is you're right. That's incredibly exciting. I forgot about that. That apparently Mobius and Miss Minutes at least are going to be in that Deadpool
Mhm.
3 movie. So they're definitely, there's going to be some big connections that they have to make, that really paint the picture for the rest of what this multiverse saga is going to look like. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the season 2 premiere of the Marvel Studios original series Loki. If you've checked out this series on Disney Plus, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.